Hi there everyone and welcome to Paper Wishes Weekly Webisodes. I'm Sarah Newman and I'm happy to bring you the 36th episode of Mixed Media, The Paper Wishes Way. Today I want to show you 5 new rice papers from our friends at Stamperia. So you probably noticed by now that we really love Stamperia and their rice paper, and even more so, you guys love the rice papers. So this is a real pleasure for me as I get to play with them and make videos for you. So today I'll show you the rice papers we're going to be working with. Now I'll move aside the card. This is one of the projects that we'll take a look at today. We have lavender. You can take a look at some of those beautiful images on there. We have botanic. Again, really beautiful large and small imagery on here. We have the Love Nature Birds collection, which I'm going to say is one of my absolute favorites. And then we have the House of Roses, big beautiful clock, which I'll be using in one of my projects. I love these butterflies and the dragonfly as well. And last but not least, we have Daisy, which you can see a beautiful border at top and bottom. I've used that on one of my cards, and then lots of nice other elements on here too. Now these are a little bit different than many of the other Stamperia rice papers. Those often have an all-over design like a map or a collaged background, and I'm kind of thinking of the Sir Vagabond and the Lady Vagabond collections. So the papers for today have lots of individual elements on here, and they all coordinate, of course, so you can use them for the front of your card, inside your card, or even the envelope if you wanted to as well. And of course, you'll probably notice that many of these elements can all be used together on a single project as well. They all have that beautiful kind of soft watercolor effect. So we'll take a look at a couple of different techniques and of course the basics of rice paper too. As you can see, we have a lot to explore today and I'm so glad that you're here. Come play with us. Let's start with a simple rice paper demo. Now, many of you are rice paper fans, so this may be a bit more of a review for you, but do hang in there with me because we're going to do some other techniques here too. So rice paper is a translucent paper with fibers, kind of like a cross between tissue paper and mulberry paper. Now, because it's translucent, you can layer it on top of pattern paper. You can also, we'll give you a sneak peek, you can also layer rice paper images on top of each other as well. You can stamp onto them, you can spatter paint, you can do gold foiling, you can do lots of cool techniques. But to start, you'll want to remove your image from the main sheet. Now you can either use a pair of scissors to cut out the various elements, and there are quite a few with some straight lines or some quite easy lines to cut around. I recommend using scissors for that rather than one of those sliding paper trimmers, because as you'll notice there are some fibers in here and those can get snagged on the paper trimmer blade. Scissors will do the trick, or if you want to have this pretty feathery edge, all you need to do is grab a paintbrush or water brush, one with a nice fine tip like I've got here, and then just use that to paint around the outside edge of your image. And then what you can do is just very gently pull to separate the fibers. Now if you bump into any of the larger fibers that are not tearing as easily, this is where you just grab a pair of scissors and give them a little bit of a snip. But here you can see, really quick and easy, and then you've got a nice pretty kind of feathery edge on here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this onto my backing paper. Now the paper that I'm using on all the cards and demos are from the Hydrangea Heaven collection from Hot Off the Press. They just went so perfectly together. So to adhere your rice paper onto your surface, I use a bit of white glue. This is the Cosmic Shimmer Specialist glue. I'm going to get a damp brush here. Now I'm using a flat brush, and this will help me to just pick up a bit of this wet glue and paint it onto my background paper. So I don't need to pour the glue on, I just need to kind of lightly apply it on here. And then I can put my rice paper element just right on top. Smooth this out from the center to the edges, especially if you're using larger pieces. and make sure that you've got all those little fibery bits really nicely secured down. You can come back with a little bit more glue if you want to, and just kind of make sure that the edges are all glued down. Then of course, do be sure you put your brush into some clean water so that those bristles don't get glued together. And then there you go, you're ready to use this on your card or project. Okay, so let's take a look at our first card. Now here I've used the rice paper borders from the daisy set. So let's take a look again at this one. I've got two beautiful borders, one down at the bottom that I've used at the bottom, and one up at the top that I've used at the top. Just glued that right onto that striped background paper. I did a little bit of splattering with Desert Sand Dilutions paint, and that's going to give a really nice additional element of color and texture on there. So I can show you, I've got one piece that I've already got some rice paper on, and I'll just put a little bit of that paint down onto my craft mat. Take my Distress Splatter brush, well used, well loved, and I'm just going to splatter this on here. So it's okay for it to get onto the rice paper and around the outside edges. Super easy to do and gives another little bit of color and texture on here. I'm just going to quickly mop this up and show you again another technique that I've done on here, which is adding some gold foiling. Now this is a really simple way to add a striking element to your cards, especially along those borders. And it's quite quick and easy to do. So I'm going to grab my glue stick and my WOW fab foil and show you how to do this. I think I've made it clear that I absolutely love adding WOW's fab foil to just about any card project. And I think it just adds such a beautiful metallic effect, especially with rice papers. Now it's super easy to do. We've talked about a lot of different application techniques, but one of my favorite is the simplest way to go. So all you'll need for this is your fab foil and a glue stick. And then you can create these really beautiful distressed gold foil edges. Okay, so I'm going to move aside my glue for a second and my foil. So this is how the foil comes in the package, but if you are like me, you will use it and use it and use it until it's pretty much bald. So you can really get a lot of mileage out of just a little bit of that foil. So what I'm going to do, move aside my card here, and I'm going to bring in this piece that we just looked at. So I have my rice paper, I've got my paint spattering on here, and I applied a bit of the glue and added my foil on here. Did that a couple of minutes ago just to give it a little time to dry. So I'm going to come in with my glue stick, and I'm just going to run that back and forth onto the paper. And then I'm going to take my foil, use the part that's not as bald as the rest of it, and smooth this down. Really want to make sure that I've got a lot of contact with the foil and the glue. And then I just let this set aside to dry. Now you can put it underneath a stack of books, or the plate in your die cutting machine also works really well. Just lay those right on top. Give it a couple of minutes to dry. Now, the longer you let it dry, the more of the gold will adhere. But this one I've had for, well, maybe 5 minutes or so. And I'm just going to pull this off gently. And you can see how I've gotten a beautiful gold foiled edge. It is not perfect. It's not really meant to be perfect. It's just there to give kind of a shabby chic vintage effect. Now, if I'm to pull this one off at this point, well, you're still going to have a little bit of that gold showing. There we go. So I've got two really nice edges on here. Now that glue stick is still a little bit tacky on here, so do be sure to let this set aside to dry, and then you can put it to use on your project. So this is how easy it is to get lots of different layers. So between the rice paper, the pattern paper, the paint spattering, and your foiling, you've got a lot going on. So lots that you can do with this. Now coming back to our card project, and again, I've got that foiling going around all four sides of my card front just to give a little bit of extra sparkle and shine. Now, On here, I've got a focal element that is also rice paper. So this postcard on here was adhered to some white cardstock, and that means I can attach it with foam tape, and that gives a little bit more lift and dimension on here. Then I just added some of the royal posies from 49 and Market. So beautiful flowers, and then also some leaves, a little bit of jute twine on here too for some texture. Then for the card inside, I have more rice paper. Now this has got a bit of color on it that I've added, and I've used dye inks for this. This is a really simple technique to do, so let's take a look at that. This is what my rice paper image looks like on the sheet. Beautiful sepia colors. Now you can leave this as is, of course, or you can color it with various mediums. So I'm using the Prism dye ink pads from Hunky Dory to paint in my image. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to move aside these elements and just show you how simple this is to do. So the first trick is to be sure that your glue is totally dry. Otherwise the ink can kind of bleed outside the areas you want. Now I've got this number 4 on here from the House of Roses sheet, and I'm just going to paint in some of the botanical elements here with my dye inks. So I'm using, again, the Prism dye inks from Hunky Dory. This is Blue Lagoon, and this one is Spring Meadow. So I'm just going to squash each of those ink colors right onto my craft mat. And then I'm going to get my trusty water brush and just kind of make a bit of a watery wash here. And then what I can do is come in and just gently dab these elements with my dye ink. Now again, it's really important that you've got a completely dry rice paper element. Otherwise, the water can kind of wick out in lots of different directions, which may be a look that you like. Or if you want to stay in the lines, then I suggest you make sure everything is completely dry. Okay, so I'm just going to dab in a little bit more here so you can see the flowers coming out. It's such a fun way to customize some of these elements. And of course, I'm doing this with the blue, making the flowers blue, but it would be beautiful with a pink or orange or red. Okay, and then all you need to do is just let this dry and you're ready to use it on your card project. And it's a great way to also make use of your craft mat as your palette too. Okay, let me find my card project again here, and we can take another look at this element in here. So I've kept the rest of the inside of the card pretty simple, just added a dazzle down here at the bottom, and then I put this up onto some oval die cuts. Super simple and a great way to mix your media with rice papers, paints, foil, dye inks, lots of other things too. Okay, now another fun thing that you can do with your rice paper is stamp on it. Now this may come as a bit of a surprise, but this is a lot of fun. Now for this card here, I've simply stamped the For You sentiment here onto the rice paper. So let's take a look at how to do this. Again, the trick is going to be that you want your rice paper element to be completely dry before you come in and do any stamping on it. And the other thing I found really helped is to use a permanent ink pad. So I'm going to be using the StazOn. This is a nice crisp black. And the sentiment that I'm using comes from one of my favorite hot off the press stamp sets, the Easy Watercolor Florals. And I'm just using the sentiment way down here at the bottom. There are a couple on here that you can choose from. Okay, so I'm going to grab my piece that is already dry, ready to go, and then ink up my stamp with that StazOn. Make sure I'm going the right direction, and then I'm just going to stamp this right on here. This is going to give me a nice crisp look. And there we go. Beautiful font, lots of fun, and a great way to personalize your rice paper elements. So again, that was using the jet black StazOn. Okay, let me show you again the card that we were just looking at. Grab this back and you can see again how this has just been added onto this rice paper focal. So the card focal is from the Love Nature Birds set. I glued it onto a chipboard square and then stamped it and edged it with Thundercloud ink. This is one of my favorite inks. It's a beautiful kind of a stormy gray, as the name might suggest, and I just went around and inked the outside edge of this. And then I've layered it onto a die cut area here. This is the double diamond die, and I've got it layered up onto some white cardstock. And then I added more of those beautiful flowers from 49 and Market. On the card inside, I've got some more pattern paper. I've got a rice paper border down here at the bottom, and the rice paper sentiment on a die cut oval. Okay, here's another card for you. Let's take a look at this one. Now, for this card, I've kept things pretty simple. I have the card front covered with that gorgeous hydrangea heaven paper. And one thing that I'll just point out, with the script paper, I have the script running vertically rather than horizontally. Sometimes we think with text paper that it has to read the way it's legible, but I think it's actually quite fun to have it going this way as well. And then I've added this large rose from the Botanic set. The drops that look like water on here, I think you can see those. These are sparklets, and I've just simply glued those on, also using that Cosmic Shimmer glue. So I've got a couple on here so it looks like raindrops on the leaves. Now the sentiment is another rice paper element that's just been glued right on top of the flowers. So you can add rice paper on top of other rice paper. And I can even show you this quickly too. So I've got this beautiful floral piece on my striped paper, and I have this little word gardening. And so what I'm going to do, grab my glue here and just add a little bit of that glue. Let's just pop this down here, and then add my gardening word going across here. And again, what I can do is come back in and just smooth out some of those edges. And you can see how nicely those will layer up one on top of the other. So you've got some additional layering possibilities here too, which I really like. Coming back to our card, so you can see I've got this nice cut out image on top of my torn image. Gives a little bit of variety. I've got some jute twine on here. And then for the card inside, I've got some more of that beautiful pattern paper, more of that gold foiling, and also a dazzle sentiment inside. So our last card is a real mixed media card. Lots of different layers on here. So let's take a look. First of all, I have my card front covered with that beautiful patterned paper. And then I added a rice paper border you can see along the edge, and this is from the House of Roses sheet. So it's this going down from the bottom all the way up to these really pretty ivy leaves coming up along here. So I've got that glued right down onto the front of my card. Then I did some splattering, of course, with that desert sand paint. And when that was dry, I glued on a die cut background, and that is from the Oliver Chicken Wire die set. And the rice paper clock that you see here is on top of the die cut. So the trick to layering rice paper onto a die cut background, I've got a couple of tips for you. First of all, you're going to want to opt for die designs that are a little bit more delicate. So something like a silhouette, a circle cut, or something that has really bold lines might end up being a little bit too bulky, but the chicken wire is absolutely perfect. Now I cut this from a lightweight cardstock, and then I used sticky specs to adhere it to the background. And sticky specs are always my go-to adhesive when gluing down really fine and delicate dies like this chicken wire. Okay, let's take a look at how to do this. And I've got a piece of the hydrangea cardstock with some of this chicken wire just glued right on top using the sticky specs. So this is ready to go. And then I just need to add my rice paper on top. So I've got a really pretty image here. And what I'll do is Same process as before. I'm going to glue on my rice paper element. Now in this case, instead of getting the glue all over here, I'm going to instead, using my craft mat as my palette, I'm just going to add the glue only to the rice paper. Now, when you're working with really large rice paper elements, just take extra care because, you know, this is quite lightweight and has a tendency to glue onto itself. So just handle it with care, and then you can just pop this down here. Same process as before, just gently adhering this from the center to the edges. And if you need to, come back with a little bit more of that glue and just make sure that those edges are completely flat. And this is really fun because I think it's neat to be able to see some of that pattern design from not only the pattern paper but also from that die cut element in there too. So rice paper is lightweight and translucent, but it's sturdy enough to go over the die without buckling or getting really warped. Really, really cool. Okay, so I'm going to show you again the card project and take another look at this. So again, here's the clock that I've got glued down onto that chicken wire. I've got some more of those 49 and Market flowers, a dazzle. I've got this dragonfly here, which is also rice paper, and I glued that onto a piece of white cardstock and cut around the outside edges so that I could put him up onto some foam tape. And then on the card inside, I've got rice paper sentiment and also this really pretty chair. I've got the happy birthday or the birthday wishes greeting on the inside with the dazzles. Super fun and easy to do. So I think you can see just how much fun we can have using these rice papers and how many different techniques there are, from simple application to some that go in a little bit more of a mixed media direction. A big thank you to our friends at Stamperia for these beautiful supplies, and thank you for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it, and we're so glad that you're here. We're really happy that you're part of our Paper Wishes family. Do feel free to leave a comment. We love to hear what you think. Each item can be purchased separately, and you can see those all below. However, we've also bundled them into a creative money saver just for you. For the money saver, just see this webisode on paperwishes.com.